Howdy, today I'm Flipping Science looking at biopolymers. So science understandings, polymer 321. So science understandings, polymers can be made from fossil resources or from renewable materials. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of making polymers from fossil resources or renewables. Some polymers are biodegradable, being able to be broken down by microorganisms and other living things. Explain why some polymers are biodegradable but others are not. Explain the advantages of polymers being biodegradable. So most synthetic polymers are produced from petrochemicals, which are non-renewable. So most of the plastics that you'll see around you, wherever you are, they're made from petrochemicals. Synthetic biopolymers are different. They're produced from or derived from plant or algal material feedstocks. So bio means living, so they're polymers that come from living things, so living plastics. Some examples are polysaccharides like lignin, starch, cellulose. We can have proteins like zein from corn, and triglycerides such as canola, castor, and soybean oils. All of these can be used as feedstocks to produce biopolymers. So down here we have some examples. So down here we have cellulose, which you can use to make celluloid. We have some alginate polysaccharides that you can use to make plastics. Gelatin down here, which comes from proteins from animals. There's many biopolymers. So let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of using petrochemical polymers. So advantages, there's still lots of petrochemicals out there. They're getting harder to access as time goes on, but it's still available. It's very easy to turn gas and petroleum into polymers because we have well-established industries that have grown to do that. And there's a wide variety of polymers that you can produce, all with different properties, and you can alter the properties of the polymers really easily by adding different fillers. Disadvantages, well, we're using petrochemicals to make the polymers, which means the feedstocks will run out. Since the resources are non-renewable, once they run out, then we don't really have a cheap alternative. So let's look at the pros and cons of biomass polymer production. So the advantages, there's lots of plants out there, there's lots of algae out there, so we still have abundant feedstocks. It's relatively easy to extract the raw materials from your living thing. Oftentimes the feedstock might be a byproduct or waste product of other industries. So waste wood products can produce lots of lignin, for example, and that can be used, and that's produced in many industries. Main advantage though, it's renewable. You can keep on growing plants, you can keep on growing algae, and it's relatively easy to do that. So it's a renewable resource. Disadvantages, there's a limited range of biopolymers that are currently available, and because of that, they're not an easy replacement for all the plastics that we're currently using. Another issue is that you might be diverting biomass from things like food production, which leads to cost and land issues. What that means is if you're growing a whole heap of plants that you could be using to feed people, but using those to make plastics, then they're not available for food. So what that means is the cost of the feedstock goes up, and that makes it less available for people to use to eat. There's also issues with the environment. With growing plants constantly, you need to make fertilizers, and fertilizers, many of them are running out, so they're not renewable. So there's issues associated with growing things just to use for plastic production. So let's talk about biodegradable and degradable polymers. So many synthetic polymers, they're in the environment for a very long time after they've been used. So here's a picture down here of lots and lots of plastic floating around in a waterway, and that plastic can be there for thousands and thousands of years. Some polymers, however, are biodegradable or degradable. So if they're broken down by microorganisms in the environment, we call that biodegradation. So again, bio meaning life. If they can be broken down by just chemical reactions in the environment, we call that degradation. And if they can be broken down by sunlight, we call that photodegradation. Some polymers are photodegradable, but the extent to which they break down the environment isn't down to their monomers, it's down to plasticky sludge. We'll talk about the Pacific trash vortex shortly. Your natural polymers, like your proteins, your carbohydrates, they are biodegradable. They break down the environment easily because there's organisms out there that want to eat them. You can get your protein from a readily available source, then you're going to do that. So many organisms can break down natural polymers. And that's one of the advantages of biopolymers compared to synthetic polymers produced from petrochemicals. Biopolymers are a lot more likely to be able to biodegrade in nature. So the ability of a polymer to degrade in nature is reliant on the chemical structure of the polymer. If you have lots and lots of strong bonds between polymer chains, that reduces the ability of the polymer to degrade. So an example down here, we have vulcanized rubber. So we start off with isoprene, polyisoprene. We heat it with sulfur. Sulfur comes in these rings of 8. Under heat, under pressure and with steam, and we get these sulfur bridges forming between the polyisoprene strands. That holds those strands together tighter, and that's how you produce your vulcanized rubber. What that means is it's very hard to break these covalent bonds between the polymer chains so that we could be able to reuse the rubber. So what you're left with is things like tires that just don't degrade in the environment. There was a movement for a while trying to make artificial reefs out of tires. They used steel cables to hold the tires together. Those steel cables degraded in the ocean, and then you just have these tires going all over the ocean. They're still trying to clean up the mess that they made there. So because of the strong bonding between the polymer chains, that makes it very hard for the rubber to degrade, so it just doesn't. So biodegradable polymers, they're specifically broken down by enzyme-assisted reactions from bacteria, fungi, or algae. So due to the enzymes present in these living things, they can break down the polymers into monomers that then they can use. So biodegradable polymers are better for the environment than your non-biodegradable ones. So a good example, polylactic acid. So it's made from cornstarch, it's held together with ester groups. Those ester groups are hydrolyzed by the enzymes present in the organisms in the environment. So you go from your lactic acid when you're making the polymer to polylactic acid, and then you have your enzymes, and you have enzymes causing the water to hydrolyze the bonds, and you get back to having your lactic acid that can then be used by the organism. Polylactic acid is quite commonly used as a environmentally friendly plastic. It's used for drinking cups and fibers and a few other things as well. So if you go to the convention center, for example, all their plastic cups that they have there are made out of polylactic acid. So what are the advantages of biodegradability? At the end of the useful life of whatever it is made out of the biopolymer, it will break down in the environment and it won't build up. So that reduces the presence of persistent solid waste, both in landfill but also in the ocean. There's problems with plastics in the ocean. There's these large, they're called trash vortices. Due to the way that the water flows around the Pacific, you get a lot of plastic that's dumped into the ocean, forming into big, large areas. The total area of some of these trash vortices is about the same size as the state of Texas in the United States. You get this layer of plastic sitting on top of the ocean. It does photodegrade a little bit, so you get this kind of soup of plastic sitting at the top of the ocean. Like I said, it's a huge surface area. Lots of organisms mistake the plastic for food, so they eat it, and that can cause issues for those organisms that eat it. So turtles are famous for this. There was a prediction a few years ago that the amount of plastic in the ocean is going to outweigh the amount of fish in the ocean by 2050, which isn't that far away now. So if we could use bioplastics or biopolymers instead of these synthetic ones that don't break down in the environment, that would be a lot better for the environment. So in Flipping Science, we looked at biopolymers. This is Flipping Science Today. See ya.